All right, I have 1 o'clock. I am recording, just so everyone knows. And so hello, welcome to our spring webinar series by Michigan Lakes and Streams Association. I am Melissa D. Simone. I'm the Executive Director for Michigan Lakes and Streams. And we would like to start by thanking the Glen Lake Association for sponsoring this webinar series. This is, our first webinar series, and in response to the fact that we had to cancel our 59th annual conference. That's disappointing, but hopefully this is a good format for all of us to be able to access the presentations we were hoping to see at the conference. So as I said a little while ago, this session is being recorded, and I have created a new MLSA YouTube channel. So all of the webinars will be recorded and posted in our YouTube channel for people to go back to. So if you know someone who missed this session, you can point them in that direction. This is also the first time we're using this webinar feature. So I will assure you, you can relax. Your video is not being shown. Your microphone is not on naturally, and you can just take in the presentation. I do encourage you during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat. I also see in this webinar function that there is a Q&A section as well. I will monitor both of those, the Q&A and the chat, if people have questions that come up, and we will address those questions at the end of the presentation. So with all that housekeeping aside, I would like to introduce Julia Kirkwood with EGLE, which is the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. She is in the Nonpoint Source Program, and we thank her for being with us today. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I think you might be able to take my screen over actually, Julia, if you go to share.
Okay. Screen one. Okay.
There we go.
We're all set. Great. Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this lovely afternoon online. So as Melissa said, I do work for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and my focus right now is working on inland lakes and really trying to figure out a way to how do we protect our inland lakes in a way that creates a more of a shared experience across the state. Because what I'm going to get into is the first part is give you a little bit of background and how we got to this program. And then I'm going to go into the Shoreland Stewards program, our online survey. And then the one thing I'm not going to talk about, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the shoreline energy and some of the wave energy. What I'm not going to talk about are the solutions to the shoreline erosion issues that are alternative to seawalls. And the reason for that is that it's just a completely different presentation that can take up another hour to couple hours as well. So I'm just really going to give some background of how we got to this and really give a big picture overview and to really make a connection to why this program is so important. So for those of you who didn't know, we have over 11,000 inland lakes that are considered 5 acres or more. And this picture gives you an idea of kind of where these lakes are concentrated. And there are, some counties have very few lakes, but some of them have like hundreds and even like up to thousands of lakes. And what that means is, overall from a state perspective, we have very limited resources to be able to gather information on these lakes across the state consistently. There are some lakes out there that we just don't have hardly any data on at all. And why this is important is that we can't, as a state level agencies, do everything for inland lakes. So we really need to look at local governments to help, and from a ordinance standpoint and what they can do at a community level. And then we also look to residents. You know, you live on that lake, or you have a cabin or a cottage on that lake, and maybe it's year-round, maybe it's seasonal, but we're also looking for everybody to do their part and trying to find a way to create more resiliency and a healthier lake system. Back in 2007, there was the first ever National Lakes Assessment that the Environmental Protection Agency conducted in partnership with all of the lakes. And then it was conducted it's going to be conducted every 5 years. So, and back in 2012, and it was fairly consistent information, the Michigan results, that our #1 threat to Michigan's inland lakes is that we have 50% of our inland lakes are deemed poor condition to the nearshore habitat loss. And so what that means is that when you look at the nearshore areas, like in the water and that aquatic vegetation, looking at, you know, macroinvertebrates, aquatic insects, looking at that immediate shoreline area, you know, kind of like where that land-water interfaces, and then also looking at that nearshore area on the land. That compilation and looking at across the state, our lakes across the state have been deemed that 50% are in poor condition. That overall is a huge threat, because when you're looking at it and comparing to what's from a nutrient standpoint, only about 8 to 10% of our lakes are actually having problems with nutrients and turbidity. And what they also found is that lakes that tend to have a poor condition to that nearshore habitat area also tend to have a problem with nutrients as well. So what this means also is that we have to do a better job. It's not all about just the water quality and how do we have, you know, better fishing or, you know, better, you know, swimming. What happens on the land in this nearshore area affects the overall water quality of the lake and the overall health of the lake. So I'm going to take you back into a undeveloped lake and what that looks like, what you would see from a vegetation standpoint from an undeveloped lake. We really think about it, a lake shore area tends to have generally three tiers of vegetation. The first one is being your large trees, as we refer to that as the tree canopy. We also look at that shrub understory area, the smaller trees, the shrubby stuff that tend to also be right at that lake shore and water land interface. And then we have the aquatic vegetation as well, as the herbaceous plants was the aquatic vegetation, maybe wetland vegetation, and then the ground cover layer also that may be underneath the trees on the land. And when you start looking at this vegetation, is that if you look at the shoreline, it is completely stable. There's no erosion happening, and there's a lot of protection all over the place. But things have changed over time. We have looked at some studies that Wisconsin DNR has done. And back in the 90s, they looked at the undeveloped lakes, what happened over time, and they looked at what was going on in the 40s and what was going on in the 90s as well. So from an undeveloped lake, they looked at how much water was running off. They looked at, sediment, and they looked at phosphorus. And they're able to do this based on, there's a lot of research that goes into this and knowing what is actually happening in terms of infiltration rates, evaporation rates, and what the soil levels are in terms of sediment and phosphorus, et cetera. And then when you start moving into the 40s, when you start looking at, everybody started to have that cottage, that up north area, we start seeing as these lake shores are built on, the phosphorus starts increasing, the sediment starts increasing, and water runoff is doing pretty good still, is about the same, but there's some things changing. That could be, so there's some trees removed, there's some, water running off, there's driveways, there's more roads. Another thing to think about too are septic systems. And these were all, for the most part, seasonal cottages. So maybe they're not up there people aren't up there during the winter. and maybe a little bit during the summer, occasionally, maybe all summer long. And then that significantly changes in the 90s, where it's becoming easier to access the cabins. There's more cabins and more cottages. The intensity around the lake is developed, and then the amount of phosphorus is significantly higher now. And this isn't just immediately around the lake, because you do have a lot of inputs from the upper watershed areas if you have any inlets coming in too. So this does affect that. But you also have now people are using these cottages longer throughout the year, and actually many of them are switching over to year-round cabins. So you're using them year-round, and then your septic systems also play a role in that. And more trees are lost, more roads are built. So when we start looking at the shoreland plants, what happened to the tree canopy? That's the overall, the light green, there is the undeveloped, the pre-development, compared to what's happening in the 90s. You're looking at that is the tree canopy still did okay. The larger trees were still there. It provides shade and people like the big trees, but you know, you've lost significantly, probably about 20% of them overall. But then you look at that shrub layer. It's significant loss of that shrub layer. And that shrub layer provides a lot of habitat for birds and other wildlife. It also, you tend to find those shrub layers right at the lakeshore, the water-land interface, and their root structure is uniquely adapted to protecting your shoreline from erosion and from ice. And one of the challenges with the shrub layer is that people think that they're messy. It doesn't look good. But shrubs are uniquely designed to protect your shoreline and protect a lot of habitat, and provide a lot of habitat. Even worse are the aquatic vegetation and aquatic plants, which most people refer to as weeds. However, if you learn anything in this presentation, please start referring to your aquatic plants as plants and not weeds. It's a completely different paradigm shift because these native plants play a role in the lake and they're incredibly important to the overall health of the lake. Now, I'm referring to this as our native aquatic plants, not necessarily the invasive species, which is a different topic as well. But you start looking at the submerged ones, the ones that the plants are fully underwater. And these are the ones that, you know, typically if you think you start swimming around, it's like, oh, you don't want to get them caught in your legs. They get almost completely removed. The floating aquatic, these are your lily pads, etc. They are also, and the emergent ones, it might be your, like some sedges or bulrushes that might be sticking up out. All of those have taken significant loss as development happens because people want a better swim area. They think it's messy. They want to clean up the shore and get rid of all these plants. You know, as city comes in, you come in from the city and you want tidy, clean and tidy, and this is the first thing that goes. So we really need to be better about that. So here's one of the reasons why is they also, in their study, they looked at what's going on in one of these lakes for green frogs. And what they found was that as the density of the housing became about 30 houses per square mile around a lake, that lake completely lost all of the green frogs. And that's due to loss of aquatic vegetation. They just disappeared. The other thing that they found, oops, sorry. What they found also at the birds level, for any of the birders out there, is that this change in vegetation, the significant loss of vegetation, changes the type of birds. It doesn't necessarily change the number and the diversity of birds, it changes the type of birds. So in an undeveloped lake, you're going to have different birds than you are going to have in a more highly developed lake. And what you'll see more is you might see more cardinals, you're going to see more goldfinches, you're going to see more house sparrows and more robins. And in a more undeveloped, you're going to see a lot of warblers, a lot of these little small insect eating birds, ground nesting birds. You're going to see more of your kind of like swallows that need roosting areas that can fly out over the lake, and the flycatchers. These types of birds are going away. So it's really important that we want to create more habitat and more maintain the habitat, and where it is lost, we want to restore where we can. The other thing that it does is, I'm sure many people have seen this complaint, maybe are experiencing this, is that the Canada goose population. One is the Canada goose population also has significantly increased over the past years too, but when you remove all of this vegetation and put in a green lawn, it attracts geese too, and they become the #1 nuisance animal because geese are grazers. So the lawn is a expansive, open smorgasbord for them. It basically is a welcome mat for geese, saying, hey, come on over here. I have free breakfast, lunch, and dinner for you. And you know what? We also have no barriers to that they have to fight with, and there's no hiding places for predators. So what that means is that their goslings are safe from predators. So when you think about your lawn, rethink what your lawn is saying to the wildlife. It's basically saying, no, this is no home for you, stay away, or geese, welcome to my property. And for those of you that have seen, I call him Sebastian because Wisconsin created a little video where there's a speaking goose and his name is Sebastian. And if you find it, you can just Google Sebastian the goose and it'll come up, or there's a link on the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership's website as well. So I'm going to jump into the hardening of the shoreline, and the reason being is shoreline erosion is a big issue, also top priority issue for people at the lakeshore. And these are just a couple of examples of types of hardening shoreline. Metal seawall, it looks like there's a concrete seawall with a lot of rock dumped at the edge too. And these become a problem. One, it is a barrier for animal movement. So if you are a turtle, your ability to get out of the lake to lay your eggs is lost. And the more seawalls that go around a lake, there are incredibly limited opportunities for any turtle to get out of the lake. And then once a lake becomes almost 90% seawall, the opportunities are so decreased that there's only a few areas where they can actually get out and lay. And you know what? The raccoons or skunks or whatever other predator come and they will find those eggs. So your turtle population becomes significantly reduced. The other thing is that seawalls and this kind of hardening of the shoreline causes erosion as well. So before I jump into that and how that happens, I want to step and talk about what a shoreline actually looks like, the kind of the anatomy and some of the terms that we might be talking about. So there is a land and water interface where the water meets the land, and it's the bottom of your bank, and this is the toe. And if you go up the bank, at the top of it is called the shoulder. And in between that space is the slope. Now, every shoreline looks different. It could be a wide shoreline like this. I mean, it could be like 3 inches wide is that slope. It could be very steep. It could be very easy slope as well. But every shoreline has something. So think about this and when you're looking at your shoreline. And the water is where the hits this, and the waves come up and create that wave action right at the bottom there. And if you notice, as these plants are in place and it can absorb some wave energy, and these plants are holding that slope in place. So this transition zone is really important in order for this waves to be more resilient, your shoreline to be more resilient. A vegetated transition zone is really important because once you lose that, some things happen. The other thing is people put in a vertical wall, and so you can see that it divides your system. You break the system and your lakeshore is no longer as resilient as it used to be. So this is a little animation to show you what wave scour will look like. As the waves come in, the energy of the waves does not disappear. People think it's like, oh, this vertical seawall will take care of the wave energy. It's not going to erode my shoreline, etc. Well, that place of that property is not going to necessarily be eroded. But what happens is that wave energy comes down and scours out the bottom of the lake. What you'll find is your lake is deeper in front of seawalls than it used to be. It can also end up scouring out all of this aquatic vegetation. It doesn't always happen. There is some aquatic vegetation in front of the seawalls, but it can also, the habitat down here for the aquatic insects, which are also known as macroinvertebrates, which are fish food and other animal food as well that live in the lake, as well as other wildlife that come in to eat the macroinvertebrates as well. Whoops, there we go. The other thing that it does is it causes wave flanking. So the energy just goes downward. It also goes sideways. And if you put in a seawall, chances are is you are going to be causing erosion on your neighbor's property, which means that they are going to be losing property. And they will now like, okay, what do I do? Do I need a seawall? And more than likely, in order to protect their property, they would put in a seawall or some kind of erosion control. There are many properties out there that do not need seawalls. Oops, here we go. Hold on. Okay, so this is an example, a couple different examples of wave flanking where this is even a sloped seawall. The wave action comes around and starts eroding this neighbor's property. And then this one, there's a seawall, and even with some toe stone here, the wave still coming around and eroding back that property. However, this property right here is all lawn, and it's only, that's not very strong shoreline right there. So here's another example of another little animation that we put together. The waves come in. Higher waves, and as they move through that aquatic vegetation within the lake, those plants dissipate the energy. So by the time they hit the shoreline, they are much smaller waves and the less energy. So before I jump, one other thing that happens too is lake level control structures create abnormally high water consistently throughout the year that a lake would not necessarily experience, except for maybe about right now where, you know, this time where water levels are significantly higher than we're definitely in a high water cycle. But what happens is that those new high water, and maybe if you have a lake level control structure, some low head dam, it changes where that toe is. It creates a new toe and it's up the slope. So what happens is when the waves come in, it's not hitting here anymore. The waves are hitting here. And so this area then becomes eroded and you start moving back up this slope. So it's even more important that this transition area is vegetated with some plants and trees and shrubs that have roots that are adapted to be at the lakeshore. So this is a great example of waves dissipating the energy. So you've got some pretty big waves, some whitecaps coming out, and as soon as they hit the plants, by the time they reach the shore, there are these little ripples. This is a great example of a property owner that did not remove all of these aquatic plants, but they just put a path through the aquatic plants in order to get more access, get access out into the lake. And then there's, looks like maybe there's a little small swim area as well. One of the reasons why you end up having a lot of erosion is the lawn right up next to the shore. Is the lawn is like 3 inches deep of the roots. It's a very weak root system and it's not designed to stand up against the wave energy. So this, this toe or this corner right here used to be way out a little bit further. And so the wave energy as it comes in and moves along the shoreline is just cutting this property back even further. So our DNR did a analysis as part of their DNR status and trends. Again, they don't look at, I think it's only about 700 lakes or something like that have as part of this. Again, we just don't have enough staff, but there is a website, our DNR status and trends viewer. There is a link on the Michigan National Shoreline Partnerships website. I think it's under the library somewhere under resources or research. And this, I pulled this off as a viewer, so the red is where they found the highest level of seawalls and shoreline hardening. And what's significant and interesting about it is only about 30% of your entire lake needs to be seawalled at a point where they consider it high and highly impactful. Low is only about 0.6% and medium is between that. So if your lake is getting about 30%, if you're hitting that 30%, you're starting to see some big impacts on your lake, the lake ecosystem, which is not a lot. So how does the Michigan National Shoreline Partnership come in? So we started in 2008, brought together a bunch of different partners, organizations, nonprofits, MSU Extension, and some consultants as well, native plant people. And our goal is to create healthier shorelines. How do we keep our shorelines from becoming completely hardened throughout the state? What are our alternatives? What we wanted to do is we wanted to create informed contractors. So we created a contractor training program. And you can find a list of contractors that have gone through our Certified Natural Shoreline Professional. And we mostly focused on these low energy sites, the low hanging fruit, the ones that really, really did not need a seawall, or maybe they had an old railroad tie seawall type thing and it's falling apart. Well, they can come in and still look at some alternative to a seawall and looking at more bioengineering, alternative erosion control options. We look at policy changes at the state level too. What do we need to do to incentivize it from a permitting standpoint? And how do we also engage our local governments and provide resources for them to look at their lakes and put in ordinances, put in changes to their policies that can create a more countywide or township-wide protection as well? Because at the state level, we only go up to the ordinary high water mark, which is right around the area of that land-water interface. We'll also look at techniques that work. What are the types of things that are going to work at the low energy and a little bit more of the medium energy? And we're starting now to move into more of the high energy and getting more tools and information out there. But the biggest thing that I'm going to focus on right now today is interested property owners. How do we create tools for them to know, what do they need to do? Where do I need to do it? And understand what's going on in their property. So one of our main outreach tools now is our Shoreland Stewards program. And it looks at the entire property. It was launched in 2016. It's an online program. It's free. It's a survey that you can take in, well, I can take it in about 10 minutes, but it'll probably be a little bit longer than you. You can take it anonymously and you can register for it as well. We highly encourage you to register because it provides you a lot more information. What we do is we look at 4 different zones of your property. We have questions specific to the lake, questions specific to the shoreline, the buffer, and the buffer is the first 35 feet. And then the rest of your property is the upland area. We didn't want to focus on just the shoreline area because the rest of the property is really important as well to the overall health of the lake. The questions are weighted, and they're weighted on which ones are most positively or negatively impactful on the overall health of the lake. And what I mean by that is picking up pet waste and not using phosphorus-based fertilizer, herbicides, or how you store your boats are important. However, they are not as important as if you are removing all of your vegetation, or if you have significant amounts of impervious surfaces right at the shoreline, or let's say your lot is 90% your house and there's very little vegetation. That is way more impactful than whether or not you pick up pet waste. So they are weighted. And if you have a great vegetation at the shoreline and your buffer and on your upland zone, you're not going to need fertilizer, because native plants don't need fertilizer. So we also looked at what we did is we looked at a lot of the different recommendations and the different research out there, and that's how we came up with our kind of like the zones and where we want to look and how we wanted to weight the questions as well. We tried to stay consistent with the Fish Division's conservation guidelines for Michigan inland lakes, which basically one of the main things is that it says is like big recommendation is that the first 35 feet of a property should have a healthy vegetated buffer, and that only 25% of a property should be used to access the lake. And we're trying to balance recreation and use of a property with the overall health of the lake. And then the picture on the side, on the right there, is also a handy little guidance document that State of Vermont put out. Also looking at a lot of the different kinds of research. The second page of it is the research documents that they used to put this together, and looked at is like, well, how big does that buffer, how much of that vegetation does it need to go depending on what you want to manage for. So that is also available on the website, on our Shoreline Partnerships website. Okay, so once you get into the survey, and yes, you registered for this one. Well, actually, this one says you're anonymous, but you are going to register because you want all the information you can get. Each question has its own page, and it'll tell you like where you are on your property. We start with the upland zone, and they're color coded throughout the property or throughout the survey. And then there'll be different answers to choose from. And then there are these drop-down boxes are also where, if you're like, well, what do you mean by that? You can click on one of these and it'll provide you information. There's graphics, there's pictures, there's text in there, there's other links in there if you want more information as well. Now, we're not expecting you to go out and measure. Use your best judgment and be honest as well. So this is one of the graphics that you might see throughout the survey. It gives you kind of like a visual about how much vegetation is really there or not there. And then it gives you kind of an idea along the different types or where the zones are as well, based on this kind of a property. Again, use your own judgment. You know, some properties, maybe the road is in front of the house, in between the house and the lake. Some people definitely have that, and what I tell people is like, well, just eliminate that road from your property. Like, start the idea of like the first 35 feet, and then skip over the road, and then finish your 35 feet on that aspect. Or maybe properties aren't completely adjacent. Just use your best judgment. It's all the property that you own. So at the end, you can get a free certificate if you register. It's color coded. It'll have your name and your lake name and the date. There is also an option to purchase a sign as well, and that is available through the Michigan Lake and Streams Association. As a partner to the Shoreline Partnership, that is part of their part of what they do to help the partnership is by offering signs available. And there's 3 different recognition levels. You can be a gold, a silver, or bronze. And people ask, it's like, well, why can't it just be one? It's like, well, a gold property looks significantly different than a bronze property. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to push the envelope and say, We want your lake and your lake property to be as healthy as we can. So if we just stop at the bronze, and because the bronze level, you will still have a significant amount of lawn in there, and we're saying is it's like, that's not necessarily okay. Yes, it's still good, but what we want is to try to push that further to that gold level. And not everybody's going to be able to qualify at any level either. There is what we refer to as a starter level, and there are some properties that will just never be able to qualify as well. By registering, you can go, there's a registering at the end. What you'll see is it'll tell you your level that you achieved. You can review your answers. You can't go back and change them, but you can go back and review them and say, oh, what was that resource? You can go back to that question and you can click on that resource as well. It'll also give you some general areas for improvement recommendations. And you can print your certificate and you can print your report, which gives you your answers and also your areas for improvement. And let's say you got a bronze and you got some recommendations for improvement and you want to make some improvements. Well, you can do that and then go back in and archive your survey and take it again. And you'll have a result for both your previous survey and your current survey and see where you've made those improvements. And it's really important, even if for your lake association too, because we want to be able to track these improvements and say, hey, we made some success. Also, people ask about properties with seawalls. At the bronze level, there are some properties that could potentially qualify if they have a seawall. And the reason why we did not completely eliminate properties with seawalls, because so many of our properties have seawalls already. So we didn't want to completely eliminate them because we know it's not feasible or practical that all these seawalls are going to be coming out anytime soon. And sometimes these, taking them out just isn't always practical as well. However, properties like these two are just not going to ever be able to qualify. The properties with seawalls that potentially would be maybe a smaller low head seawall and it's a larger property, or maybe the house sits back and there's just a lot of opportunity to replace vegetation. I will also add that any new seawalls that are put in after December 31st, 2018, the properties are just not going to be able to qualify at all. And we did that because what we're saying is we're taking a stance and say for the Shoreland Stewards program is that there are options for seawalls. There are alternative designs and we have contractors that know how to do that. So it's not going to be an option. Yes, seawalls are still legal in Michigan, but we're saying for the Shoreland Stewards program is that you probably don't need one. And if you do need one, then you're probably not going to qualify for the Stewards program anyways. So there will be graphics along the line too. You'll see these graphics to help you better find your zone. There's like 3 different kinds of shoreline zones. It gives you different visuals about, well, how does my property fit into this? So there'll be some different graphics to help you. Again, we don't have every scenario identified out there. We tried to be as inclusive as we could to help you better understand what's going on your property. And it'll be, not only will be those graphics, but you'll see some of these pictures like this and annotated to help you visually see like where you might fall. So the picture on the right, their shoreline zone is only about 3 or 4 inches wide. The picture on the left looks like about 3 feet or so. The shoreline is their shoreline zone. So you start your buffer zone at that top of that bank and work back 35 feet. So this will be kind of like an example of a question. So what percentage of your buffer zone has trees, shrubs, grasses, flowers? And you have like 5 different options. The best is going to be 75% or greater. And this is an excellent example of that buffer zone is 75% or greater. And the color coding is shown on, like, if you get to the red, that's like the absolute worst. And you're going to get an improvement at the end of it. If you look at the property to the left of this one, you'll also see some erosion happening right here. This is all lawn. There's nothing there to hold that shoreline. So this would probably rank, and if this is as wide as that property is, there's a little bit more over, it'd probably be less than 10%. So these are a couple of different examples of where you might change your practices. You know, what are your pathways? Can you just do a pathway as opposed to tearing down all the trees? Creating just a small access area. Yes, we want you to enjoy the lake. We're not saying it's like, oh, you absolutely have to have no lawn, but how much lawn can you get rid of? How much lawn do you really need? Another option, if you want a view of the lake, just trim the lower branches rather than cutting down the whole trees. So we're really thinking about from an aspect of share the shore. So this is an example of some properties where none of these properties in the picture would qualify right now. If any of these properties took the survey, none of them would qualify. However, what I see is an incredible amount of potential for these properties to qualify. I see a lot of great things. I don't see seawalls in this anywhere, which is a huge benefit. I see all of these properties just having these small areas of aquatic vegetation removed, for their access areas for the boats, and they're leaving the rest of the aquatic vegetation. That's excellent. There are a couple of properties that have significant amount of impervious surface, which would make it really challenging for them to qualify, but the rest of them are doing pretty good on the impervious surfaces. And that impervious surface includes all of your buildings, the roofs, and your driveways, your parking areas. So what I see on here is like, wow, there's all of these properties, all they have to do is revegetate their properties and they could qualify. So it's just, thinking outside, what can you do? Be creative. It's like an artist palette, but it's outside on your lawn. So a good example of an option to do is a simple no-mow zone. And this property was just, she just stopped mowing. There was a lot of plants in there that were non-native. So all we did was go in and remove some of those plants by hand pulling, and then just planted in a bunch of plugs. And this was 1 year later, down in all the black-eyed Susans was 1 year later. And the bigger picture on the lower right was taken last summer. So it was almost 20 years later, and still going strong, and they're doing a fantastic job. This is an example of both of them, significant amount of impervious surfaces. Yes, they look beautiful, and the landscape artists and whoever put them out there did a fantastic job. However, both of these are not healthy for the lake. It's just way too much impervious surfaces, different things that could have been done. So depending on the size of both of these properties, you start getting at that percentage in the red zone at 26%. So we're trying to say, it's like, if you're going to have any kind of patios or sitting areas, ideally we would like them out of the buffer zone, out of that first 35 feet. And there are situations where it's just not always possible because of the slope of the property. So you really have to choose on what you can do and cannot do or should do. Some examples of some different options within the buffer zone as well. A little pathway, they're trying to this property in the upper left was just replanted. There are some non-natives in there, and what they did was they left the non-natives and added in natives as well. So we're not saying it's like, oh, there is landscaping, rip out everything that you've done, just add in where you can. And then, you know, a nice platform down here, sitting platform. Same with this one on the right-hand side, a nice sitting platform. Both of them are maybe a little close, but still, depending on the size of the property, it just makes sense of what they've done, and maybe a little bit more vegetation could be there, but still, it's still overall pretty good. Another one is looking at artificial beach. We really discourage putting in artificial beaches. If you do, make sure that they are smaller and limited. So the one on the left here is a smaller area. It's a larger property, so that little area, maybe that's probably naturally sandy there. They just remove the vegetation and maintain the sand. However, the rest of this is hugely lawn, and that should be addressed. The one on the right, definitely they brought in sand and dumped sand along their entire front of their property. That is not as healthy as it should be. I would rather have sand there than impervious surfaces, but vegetation is even better. I will say though, there are some lakes that have that naturally sandy, significantly sandy beaches, and that's okay. Stormwater. This is another big problem. People put in storm drains and take all of their runoff and dump it directly into the lake. When it's going directly to the lake, it's also taking extra sediment, extra nutrients. You got a lot of phosphorus, extra water. When you're taking the water that used to infiltrate slowly into the ground, now it's going immediately to the lake. This changes the hydrology system of your lake and how that affects the water. Especially right now when higher water is there, the more water that is getting immediately dumped into the lake rather than allowed to soak in the ground ends up in the lake and creates even higher water. So the more water that you can keep out on the land and allowed to soak in slowly, the better. And one way that this can be done is rain gardens. The graphic on the right is how it can work. And then this graphic, or the picture on the left, the road was somewhat recently paved, and this was about 20 years ago when this went in, and it collects the water from this road. The property is sloped down to the lake, and that water was running down to the lake. So there's like a berm right here. There's a hole, and that was dug, and it's sloped, and this is a berm, so it captures all of the water. Another idea is kind of like wet gardens, where you're not necessarily infiltrating, but you're capturing the water and allowing it to settle out any pollutants and clean it before it actually gets into the lake a little bit. So this was a boating access, road end access up in, I think, Emmett County. And they're capturing all the water that's coming down here. It used to all run into the lake. This is a private property on the right, and there's kind of like a wet stream almost kind of running into the lake. This property owner, rather than putting in a pipe and directing it all to the lake, they decided to use the vegetation. And this is kind of like a patio sitting area, and they use vegetation, and that's significantly wet almost the entire year. Another option, if you don't want to maintain gardens, is just using rock infiltration. This is allowing infiltration right from the roof runoff. And then maybe this one here is collecting water off the parking lot or the driveway there. So some resources that you can use. These are all available on the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnerships website. Actually, the one in the middle, though, is available. It's a book. You can buy it through MSU Extension's bookstore. The link is on the website. It's $25. But the other two and more resources are available as well to give you ideas about what you can do. Also, I want to mention on the Stewards website is that lake associations can actually register. They are provided a page, their own page, to connect to their website or connect people to their contacts for their groups. And you don't have to be an official association that's got a 501(c)(3). You could be just a small group, a small lake that doesn't have any official thing, but you want people to know about your lake. And then you get an icon on the Stewards page. The other thing that it does, it provides you access to resource materials that you can use to promote the program. And then your name, your lake name, your lake association name or group name gets put into a drop-down box for when somebody registers. So at the end, then an email will get sent to the lake contact. And this helps to help promote more of a community atmosphere, and hey, we're all in this together and we all need to do our part. Now, Melissa mentioned that Glen Lake Association sponsored this website. I just found out about that last night, and so I quickly did an analysis on their participants. And I also mentioned that Glen Lake Association was one of the lake groups that participated in our focus group when we were first designing this whole program and the website. So they've been, so they have a total of 91 participants, and 71 of them, at 78% of them, qualified as stewards. And I broke it down into there's 30 of them that actually registered, and 41 of them took it anonymously. And breaking it down is that, oh shoot, I forgot the number. There's about 23 gold and about 25 silver and about 23 again as browns, and then the rest were incomplete, like maybe they didn't finish fully the survey, and then the other ones didn't qualify. So there was only about 12 of those. And also, just another little factoid is that there are 9,947 linear feet of the Glen Lake properties that are actually qualified as a shoreland steward. So this graphic is showing you where those are. Most of the anonymous are actually missing on this. We tried doing I was hand putting them in, but they ended up, in the middle of the lake, and I was doing it for something else. So we kind of eliminated the anonymous. It gives you an idea of where people are. The other thing we do is the Shoreland Stewards ambassadors. We wanted to give lake groups tools that they can use to help understand, how do I get this information out, and give you some support and just some ideas and kind of structure. And this little graphic here shows you what to do. It's available on the Shoreline Partnerships website. It is all online, it's all free. What that looks like is some training materials. You can download everything. There's like 5 different PowerPoints that you can work through. You can watch them online. You can work through them online, or you can download the PDF and work through them on your own. You print everything and put them in a nice fancy a notebook. There is also a Shoreland Stewards program guide. You can download that and you can email those things out. There's a lot of different graphics that you can email, you can use. Everything is available for lake associations to use in the graphics. You just need to give us credit. You can't use them in your own materials and say, hey, look what we developed, or for any monetary gain. We also produced a video series as well. There is an introduction to the program, and then there is a video for each of the different zones. They were done really, really nicely. And they're only about 4 or 5 minutes long. So they're really fun, they're engaging, and helps you, just get you some better ideas about each of the different zones. You can promote those through your lake associations, on your websites, whatever. And you can link on them on your websites as well. Another tool to look at is the Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnerships Conservation Planner. If you go to the Midwest Glacial Lakes website, I haven't put a link to this on the Shoreline Partnerships website, but you can. They did an analysis on like 40,000 lakes in the Midwest, and you can find your lake on here, and it'll tell you like and give you a big picture, general idea about where your lake is in terms of this lake is a little lake, Pine Lake in Kent County, 57 acres. The watershed disturbance is at 50% in the yellow zone, and their shoreland disturbance is at 70% and really high in the red zone. Doesn't take much to get in the red zone. But what it's not specifically saying is like, oh, that 70% of the lake is seawalled. But they look at the first 100 meters around the lake and look at a lot of different anecdotal information and research, and that's how they're coming up with this numbers. And so basically for that lake, they're saying is like, you're along that shoreland area, you need to put a lot of effort into kind of rehabilitating that shoreland area and mitigating anything that can't physically change, like seawalls, et cetera. What else can you do to ease those problems? So you guys can join us at the 2020 Michigan Inland Lakes Convention in Grand Rapids on September 17th to 18th. We're hoping that we don't have to cancel this one. So just look for information out there. Our abstracts, a call for abstracts is open right now as well. Okay, I think that's all I have. I feel like I missed something, but I can go ahead and take questions.
All right, well, thank you very much, Julia. We really appreciate that. There are quite a few questions.
Okay.
I think we'll start with the chat. I think Lon was wondering if you could show that shoreline assessment tool that we were kind of emailing back and forth about. I don't know if you have that available.
Shoreline assessment tool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, like the shore?
No, I think it was the video. They had that drone video.
Oh, that was Dennis Wyans thing?
I think so.
Oh, yeah, I don't know where I put that. So
That's
it would take me a little while to find that.
That's all right. All right, so then we also have, will EGLE consider issuing permits for creating a sloping addition on the water side of a seawall to mitigate wave action and animal passage?
So one of the recommendations to do is in places where it's just not feasible to take out a seawall or replace it, the recommendation is to actually put in riprap. It should be sized appropriately. It's not just, hey, let's go dump a bunch of rock. But there is a process to do that, and it does need a permit, and you can get a permit to do that. And any new seawalls that go in, they are required to put some kind of rock structures in front of the seawall. And what that does is it helps absorb the wave energy, reduces the scour effect a little bit, and does provide a little bit of habitat for aquatic insects. It doesn't necessarily allow for turtles to climb up, because turtles are at about 6 inches. They can't go beyond 6 inches. But there are some options that people have done where they were putting in some kind of erosion control structure where they added a turtle ramp or something like that, or you can, depending on how high your seawall is, you could put a turtle log in as turtles to come out and bask. I mean, you obviously have to think about safety, boating safety, but for low head seawalls where a turtle could actually, climb up on a log and climb up out, that's totally allowable.
Right. I do see a question about your PowerPoint. Would that be something that we could share with people, the PowerPoint for this presentation? Okay. All right. So I will make sure to have that on our website as well. So thank you for that question. We had a comment sort of question, a little surprised to see geese walking through my natural shoreline. Are they getting bolder?
Okay. So not necessarily. A couple of things, to think about is that geese will go through natural vegetation. The thicker it is and the more challenging it is for them to walk through, they will find an easier route. It doesn't necessarily, you also have to look at what does your neighbor's property look like too, and how wide is your buffer vegetation. You know, using shrubs helps deter them as well. You know, one of my favorite lakes is a completely natural lake. There's only one building on it, and it's way, you know, very small area for access. And there are a couple of families of geese that tend to be on that lake. And I do see them go up into that vegetation. The difference is there's only a couple of families of geese every year, if that. And so if I went to the similar sized lake that was developed, I would say that lake would probably have like a couple hundred geese or at least 50 geese out there. So it does make a difference on how dense and how wide your buffer is. And also notice, like when you're putting, there are a lot of flowers that people put that there might not naturally have been at your lakeshore. So you just have to think about what vegetation could I add in to help deter them a little better.
Okay. And then Tricia Denton actually said that on Glen Lake, or the Glen Lake Association uses that zero gravity aerial drone survey.
Okay.
So I'm going to put her on and she can tell us a little bit about what they do with that. All right, Tricia, I think you can, oh, I think maybe you have, there you go. Okay, now you can.
I'm on live.
Hi.
Well, thank you again. Hi, everybody. It's always great to hear Julia. She does an amazing job with presenting this really important information. Thanks again, Julia. I just wanted to comment on how the Glen Lake Association continues to use this valuable resource to create change in our watershed, not just among the people who actually take the time to complete the survey, but it's having a real impact. We've been using Dennis Wyand zero gravity aerial drone surveys in 2017 and again in 2019. And we're seeing really positive changes around our lakeshore. People are getting the message. Again, whether they take the survey or not, which I still recommend because that direct feedback that you can get when you register is invaluable to individual property owners. But it's having that sort of cultural effect of shifting the culture of this is what we do here, right? And people feeling positive about that. While not everyone can do everything, everyone can do something. And anything that we do that's good for the water anywhere is good for the water everywhere. So with that in mind, we've seen really positive shifts, and we've been able to use revealing changes in improvements with our membership and pair that with those really great videos that were created this past year. We're going to be featuring the Shoreline Zone 1 in an upcoming informational email to our members on the high water levels, for example. A lot of people are having increased erosion, and what a perfect time to use that resource to educate people on what they can do on their property. We can't control Mother Nature, but we can do something about our toe and our shoulder, right? So thank you again for the opportunity to hear your talk again, Julia, and I look forward to hearing how other lake associations are able to use this to improve their water. We are actually also involved with policy changes. We are working with the 4 townships within which our watershed lies with implementing an overlay protection special zoning district. And I know other lakes have done this as well, but we're directly incorporating the recommendations of the Michigan Shoreland Stewardship Program into that proposed overlay district and are having really good results. Again, from an educational standpoint, if not policy yet, but we have made some positive policy gains as well. So thank you again, and I'm always available as an ambassador of the Michigan Shoreland Stewardship Program to offer my brainstorming or assistance to any other lake associations that are looking at how they can use this wonderful resource in their own backyard. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Tricia. That was very helpful.
I see a couple that I wanted to make sure I get answered.
Mm-hmm.
So one was if I was aware of Score the Shore, and yes, absolutely I am, and we're actually trying to promote this program and Score the Shore together. There are other lakes that have done, particularly in the northwest part of Michigan, as part of their watershed management plans, inventory, doing a shoreline survey as well. And what we want people to do, ideally, is to do the whole lake inventory. And then ideally, you know, they get an individual score that's like right at that shoreline, and then have them do their own individual property assessment through the Shoreland Stewards, and then, you know, promote it, make changes, and then 5-10 years down the road, go back and do it again and see what has changed or what has not changed. One other one I saw, can local government adopt zoning to protect buffer zones? Yes, absolutely. And we have guidance on, or the 2 books that are available on for local government officials on protecting inland lakes are available. They're hard copy. We don't have a ton of them, but they are available for download. And as Tricia said, they're working to make that happen. Is the Shoreline online survey applicable to other states? Well, overall, yes. There are people that have used it from other states. And what I tell people is, if you want to use it from other states, please register. Do not take it anonymously, because that skews my information. And if you take it because right now I need to get some changes made. But right now, if you take it, you can only take it from a Michigan county. So there's no option to choose from a different state yet. So just register, you know, choose a Michigan county, but put in your address, and it'll let me know that you're from a different state. There was one about the campfires. Is it true the ashes are condensed forms of nutrients for the high waters encroaching on many campfire rings, especially phosphorus? Absolutely. Those campfire ashes have extremely high levels of phosphorus. So what we tell people is that ideally, if you're going to have a campfire down by the lake, please do not have it in the shoreline zone. And I know the high water levels are making it a little difficult, but ideally, if you can create what we call best management practices, is a way that ashes do not get into the lake. You know, try to move them back as far as possible, and keep them out of the lake. Oh, you know what? I didn't mention one thing. I see a question on which plants like to have wet feet. On the Michigan National Shoreline Partnerships website, we have native lists of plants on there that are organized. There's different lists, and they're organized by where they'll be most successful. So there's in the lake, there's in the kind of right at that shoreline zone, and kind of more of a wet zone as well, and then the upland areas for the drier areas as well. The biggest thing is look at what else was around your lake or should be around your lake. And if we can encourage you to use shrubs, there's a lot of beautiful shrubs out there that are easily trimmed and flowering, and just some amazing wildlife habitat, berries. I highly recommend shrubs where you can use them. I see one about information about existing storm drains that end at the lake's edge. So that's on an individual lake. We at the state level don't have any information usually about where those storm drains are, unless you're working with a community that has are permitted under these large communities. Or they're in their watershed management plans, and they're not always identified. So you have to work with your community where they are and find them and map them.
Okay, here's a question about the mindset of a groomed shore, and I guess how to overcome that. It's definitely always a question.
Yeah, so this is never an easy question, and it's never an easy challenge. This is really why we're trying to put together all of these tools. In the Shoreland Ambassadors guidance, we provide some social science information about looking at how you approach this. We try to look at cues to care. And for these particularly older seniors or anybody who has this, really neat and tidy, I mean, that means that they are caring for them to be neat and tidy, it means that they're telling you that they're caring for their property. May not be as healthy for the lake as it should be, but that's the mindset they're in. And then there's a curve that's called, you're trying to get this critical mass for social diffusion theory, where this big curve that goes that you work on the people that are initially first, that are already doing it, and start promoting it with them and getting them talking about the program, maybe get them to take the survey and place a sign out at their end of their property to show that you're doing the right thing. And then are there other people around the lake that say, hey, you know what, yeah, I'm really interested in it, but I just don't know what to do. Those are your next people. And what the social diffusion theory says is, like, once you meet 15% critical mass, you start making that cultural change a little bit more. And just try to promote a little bit more, have a simple conversation about them, and promote the information that they can do on their own. And I've talked to a few people that say, you know what, I thought I was doing great, but I just took the survey and I am the poster child for what I was doing wrong, or for what we were doing wrong. So she was going to make some changes. So it does take time. It is not an overnight thing. And I've been working on this since, I don't know, 2008. And I have seen some changes already, just in terms of how many people are interested, how many people are calling me and wanting to do the right thing.
Okay, I think there's a question about what it costs to become a certified natural shoreline professional.
So that information is on the Shoreline Partnerships website. It's and there are lists of them on the website as well. I just recently updated it. There is I think the cost is like $250 right now. It's a 2-day class in person, and then a third field day class. Right now, we're going to start reimagining what that looks like over time, and maybe eventually there might be some kind of online concept in the future. But for right now, it's 2 days in person. That's usually in East Lansing, and the field day right now, it has been in Pawpaw in June.
Okay, I think there's a follow-up on storm drains. Once they're mapped, can you recommend a modification to shoreline surrounding it? Do you think cities will invest in changing these? And do you know of how to redirect the storm drain?
Well, each storm drain and each situation is gonna, needs to be looked at individually. It depends on, like, okay, so where's the storm? You have to figure out where the storm water is coming from. If it's just a parking lot, that's pretty easy to address, as you just create more of a stormwater basin, and it does take money. But if you're getting water from almost like 5 acres or 10 acres of a city, that's going to be a little more challenging. So you have to look at the space, and it might be all like different kind of curb cuts, collecting the stormwater before it even gets into the storm drain to try to treat and filter it before it gets into the storm drain. So every situation, Grayling has a lot of them throughout their city. Many other communities too. Sometimes, gardens, definitely comes down to management issue. So I always recommend, it's like, don't put in 50 different plants. It's like maximum 5. And if you're, if it's a smaller one, maximum 3, particularly for a community standpoint. Just depends.
All right. Did anyone else have any other questions that they wanted us to address? I see that someone is asking for a way to contact Trisha. So I think someone else answered it, but we'll get out that information if that's okay with Trisha. And again, I want to thank you, Julia, for coming and speaking with us about this. This is always an important topic.
You're welcome.
And I also want to thank the Glen Lake Association again for their sponsorship. Oh, good. She just gave me that. So I will have that email address that somebody asked for available.
I just saw one.
Yeah.
Where would I find an undeveloped lake? Those are going to be within the national land and state land, and any state forest, any national forest, or any state land for right now, for the most part, or they're privately owned, some smaller ones.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of our session. I'm going to share my slide one more time. We do have a series of these webinars. Next week, one of Julia's counterparts from EGLE and the Nonpoint Source Program will come and talk to us about land use and runoff and rivers. So that will be a really interesting talk as well. And if you visit the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association website or our Facebook page, you will see the upcoming webinars. Our website is mymlsa.org, and all the webinars are listed right on the home page. So we appreciate you joining us today. We hope that you will join us again. And you know, we hope you have a wonderful time in this strange time of staying at home. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.